Hi everyone, my name is Maddie Falkenstern. I have been in 4-H since age 9, and I chose the poultry project area from the beginning. You might be wondering, why her? Why is she good to teach me about poultry? How much does she know? Well, first of all, I've gotten first in the 4-H state showmanship competition. I've been in FFA all 4 years of high school, and I took my 4-H poultry judging team to the state convention, and we took third. So I think we did pretty well. I do not claim to be the foremost authority on meat birds. I will just say that I do know a lot about birds by this point. But one thing that you learn in the poultry project area is that you are always learning. So, selecting a production bird, what do I look for? Okay, so when you go out to look for a production bird, and they're really young, a really good indicator of the growth of a production bird is the width of their skull. You want the birds with the widest skulls, and those will be the birds that put on the best muscling for you later on. The next thing is, if your bird is pretty old, like 16 weeks old, or older, if you're doing just a normal bird, not a production bird, but if you're doing a production bird, let's say it's 4 or 5 weeks old, and you want to start judging it on its actual meat qualities. What you can look for is that it has a straight back, because you want the back to be straight. That's also an indication that the keel bone is going to be straight. And then you can check the heart of the girth. And what you do to do this is you place your fingers on the ribs by the sides of the wing attachment. So you kind of put your fingers across the length of their back, and you place your fingers on the sides of the wing attachment. And what you want to do is you want to feel that it has the greatest depth of body and that it's wide across the front, because that is desirable for a meat bird. You want a meat bird with a shorter, wider back that has a good depth of muscle. You don't want a concave back, and you don't really want the muscle to taper either. By tapering, I mean that there's really good muscle in the front, but as soon as you go towards the back of the bird, it just kind of tapers off. And that is not what you want. You don't want tapering. All your birds should be uniform, which means you should pick the birds that have the most similar body type to each other and enter them in fair. So basically you want the birds that are all the same sex and they look the same. Another way that you can judge the meat quality is you can feel the depth of their keel. So what you want to do is you want to take the bird and you want to run your fingers down the length of the keel bone. And when you do that, you're feeling for the muscling on the breast, and you want the breast to be as wide as it can be, and you want the most depth of muscling. And when you feel that breast, you don't want the breast to be mushy. You want the breast to be very hard, because in production birds, the breast is the most valuable meat on the chicken. The next thing you can kind of do is on the keel, on the breast, when you're evaluating your meat bird, you can kind of push up towards the keel to feel the depth of the muscling on the bird. And if it's good and it's hard and you can press on it and your finger goes up, but it meets some resistance, that means it has good depth of muscling on the keel. Another thing that you want to do is you want to check the muscling on the thighs, because the muscling on the thighs is the second most valuable muscling on the bird. So to do this, you hold your bird in one hand, and you take your other hand, and with your other hand, you just kind of run your hand down the thigh. And you're checking to make sure that the thighs are firm and wide on the bird. Now, there's also some disqualifications that we need to talk about. So the DQs on a production bird would be crippled, blind, they have a really crooked breast, which means they have a crooked keel. They have breast blisters, the wrong shank color, and this could be a disqualification, or it could be just a defect, is your birds are not all the same sex. When you put production birds in fair, you want to make sure that you have 3 birds that are all the same sex. I saw birds a couple of years ago in the barn that were not the same sex, and the people got reprimanded by the judge. So you really want to make sure they're all the same sex. The judges really focus on, besides all the meat qualities, which is first and foremost on a production bird, the judges really focus on how yellow their shanks are. And you want the shanks to be as yellow as possible on the bird, and you want all the toes to be straight and yellow also. So I recommend a couple weeks before you put your bird into fair, you start feeding them whole corn. And basically, how this works in chickens is the pigment from the corn will go right into their legs, and that's what makes most birds' legs yellow, and that's also what makes the yolk of the egg yellow, is the yellow pigmentation from the legs, and they get that from the corn. So if you feed them corn, you should be good on that. Another kind of overall thing that I look for on the meat birds is fleshing. So you want your meat birds to have just a little bit of fat on them. You can take their skin and kind of take their skin and just gently roll it around in your fingers. And you can see if it rolls around in your fingers pretty well, that bird has fat, it's adequately fleshed. It's just more presentable and tastier if they have just the slightest top coating of fat on them. So, tips for caring for your meat birds. Okay, so first of all, we all know that meat birds are very, very, very messy. If you keep them confined, you always want to keep the shavings clean, because meat birds tend to get breast blisters, which, if you've ever raised meat birds, is a big problem, and that is going to seriously impact how your market birds are judged if they have breast blisters, because no one wants to eat a piece of meat off a bird that has blisters on it. That is not good. Another thing is, if you don't keep your pens clean, they're prone to bumblefoot. And what bumblefoot is it's just an infection inside of their foot, so it'll look like a sore. And if you let the sore fester on the meat bird, what happens is they become crippled. So that's also another thing you want to watch out for. When I was trying to put flushing on my birds, I used corn oil for the last 2 weeks and mixed it in with the feed. It's a really good way to get them to eat as much feed as possible. It also makes it easier for them to digest the feed. It puts a nice coat of flushing on your bird, and it also makes their feathers really shiny because of all the oil. Another thing you might want to consider doing is putting a little bit of apple cider vinegar in their water. And I'm talking about like a teaspoon per gallon of apple cider vinegar. And basically what apple cider vinegar does is it works as a probiotic, so it makes it easier for the meat bird to digest the food and get the proper nutrients. It has also been known to be a natural dewormer, so if you have some birds and you're not sure if they have worms or not, you can just give them a little bit of apple cider vinegar every day, and they should be fine. When you're looking for meat birds to get or select, what you want to make sure is ideally they'll have a 2 to 2.5 pounds of feed for every pound of muscle gained. And that is the industry standard for your feed conversion ratio on your bird. Another thing you can do to maximize the amount of weight that your birds gain is if they're in a situation like they're in a coop or in a barn, you can put at least 10 hours of artificial light on the birds. This will cause them to eat more. It will also cause them to exercise more, so that muscle will be firmer, and they'll eat more, so then they'll grow faster. Now, bathing your meat birds. This is a very contentious subject. And I've seen people come into fair and their meat birds are really dirty. And it really, when your birds are dirty, it hampers your overall presentation. So like the first thing you want to do if you go to the fair, even if you don't bathe them, is you want to make sure those birds don't have parasites. So they like don't have lice, they don't have mites on them. It's kind of disgusting if you're trying to sell these birds for someone to eat if they have parasites. So what I would do is, if I don't bathe the bird, if some emergency happened and I could not bathe the bird and get it clean, I would at least dust it to make sure it doesn't have any live parasites on it when you get it to fair. If you do have time to bathe your meat bird, which I do highly, highly recommend that, I recommend that you pre-treat them first using hydrogen peroxide. What the hydrogen peroxide does is it lifts the stains out of their feathers. And you can simply take a cotton ball and then dip the cotton ball in the hydrogen peroxide and pre-treat, like you're treating laundry, pre-treat the stains on the bird's feathers. So that makes it better. And it'll just bubble, and you can let it bubble on there for 3 or 4 minutes and then rinse. And when you rinse, your bird will come out looking a lot cleaner. As far as soap, I would just use regular ivory soap, bar soap, Y soap, unless your bird is like really, really dirty. Then I would use just a tiny bit of bluing. You don't want to use too much bluing because then the bluing will actually make the birds blue. That has happened to a couple of friends of mine where they've been bathing their cochins, which are white, and they make their birds completely blue, and you don't want to do that. I'm trying to think of what else I can tell you about meat birds. Oh, if you have like emergencies, the day of showmanship, and you get in there in the morning and your bird has gotten very, very dirty, a thing I recommend taking with you to fair is a little bit of cornstarch. And cornstarch is white, and it just helps you kind of like lift the stains and makes it not so wet, so you can brush a lot of the dirt off. So I'd put a little bit of cornstarch on any really wet spots that you have on your bird too. That's a very good tip. So this is my first video, and if you have any questions, you can leave it in the comments, and I will try to get back to you as soon as possible. Thank you.